Welcome, everyone. This is actually, as everyone knows, our inaugural year, and we are extremely proud not only to introduce a new chapter for an International Contemporary and Modern Art Fair in Chicago, but more importantly to set the table and begin a new chapter in conference and panel program. We call this Dialogues, and I would say throughout the last several days we have been extremely pleased to have very strong attendance with some extraordinary discussions, and I think it's important that the conference and panel and the discussion and the dialogue about the business of art, about the business of creating, about the business of the business is an important asset in an art fair, because ultimately, you know, we all need to learn a bit and review current contemporary cultural purchases. So I'm extremely proud to be standing here in this first year. I'm extremely proud to be representing not only EXPO Chicago, but the hopes and wants and the enthusiasm of an extraordinary city. As everyone knows, we have an extraordinary legacy. We not only are standing in a venue that pioneered an art fair in North and South America, but we're also standing in a venue that was built specifically for an art fair. Way back in the early 90s, there was no way that Navy Pier was going to be renovated without making sure that the festival hall or a consumer trade show area was able to house a great international art fair. And again, I'm extremely proud to be standing here welcoming all of you, and also having an opportunity to welcome such an illustrious panel to discuss about how an art fair can actually impact a community. Of course, that's why we're here today, and that's why I'm here tonight. I'm going to begin at my immediate right, Jack Guthman. I won't go too deep into biographies because I'm sure each will have a discussion about their many years of service. Jack Guthman not only has been an extraordinary lawyer, a trustee for our institutions, the founding trustee of the Museum of Contemporary Art, but more importantly, a patron of the arts extraordinaire. And it's important for any city to have a collector, a civic leader like Jack and Sandy Guthman, who really understand the role of the arts in a community, not only about just a specific institution, but also just as a patron to enjoy, whether it's performing or visual. Stephanie Smith, curator at the Smart Museum. Again, I think everyone is going to speak about a bit of their past as they speak within the context of their role in this community. Stephanie has played a large role in shaping what is, for the Smart Museum, an extraordinary legacy of curatorial exhibitions, and most importantly, representing our city across the globe. Most recently, I saw her tirelessly working Documenta in ways that not only was not to enjoy, review, and learn about, but most importantly, be a great ambassador for our city and the institution, the Smart Museum. Anthony Meyer, or Tony Meyer of Anthony Meyer Fine Arts, played a large role this year, I must say, as a selection committee member for our inaugural year. We all know Tony not only for his eponymous gallery, but his extraordinary service to the world as a dealer representing San Francisco and the world, and a number of artists that I'm sure he will speak about. Linda Bloomberg, equally as important. I'm extremely grateful for your outreach to me to make this this first ADAA panel happen this year. It's important for us to make sure that our organization and your organization plays a large role. I must say that I think we did a little bit of the math. 50 of our exhibitors are members of the ADAA, and I would expect that to continue, or I hope that that continues. So, of course, we want to make sure that we're of service to not only the membership, but of service to the galleries that represent our country. Linda, thank you. Rhona Hoffman, I will add to the list as being a leader and probably the most intrepid, tireless supporter of what what you're standing in today. Rhona Hoffman not only is a selection committee member for the inaugural EXPO Chicago, but has provided extraordinary leadership along with Tony Meyer in helping us shape, do outreach, and make sure that we're doing of right service to what is the most important thing is our exhibitors at this fair, as well as the artwork that's being represented. After all, that's first and foremost in our mission and our commitment to all of you. Paul Gray, at the end of the table, has represented, I think I read, over 25 years of work, not only with his father's gallery and your gallery, should I say. I see Richard Gray in the back. I don't think there would be an art fair in Chicago. I don't think there would be a dealer, a curator, or an institution in the world that doesn't recognize that if you think about Chicago, you understand what it means, or you need to go to Richard Gray Gallery for what it means in excellence and pioneering what Chicago gets to reflect outside. And Paul has been an extraordinary champion and leader, not only in our community with our institutions, but along with Rhona, an extraordinary ambassador for our city. And I don't think I would be standing here without his advice and counsel and great leadership for this evening. So I'm going to leave to do the work of what an art fair organizer needs to do. Instead of speaking on the panel, I'm going to make sure that we're of service to the exhibitors, and I look forward to hearing a little bit more about the discourse and how everyone can explain the role of an art fair as it will shape our city and our long legacy in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you. Can you hear us? Is the mic working? Okay. Thank you very much, Tony. I do have to say that we all feel incredibly welcome here in Chicago, and I'm really overwhelmed with how beautiful the city looks. The park and the institutions, the museums have been extraordinary. So thank you all for making us feel welcome. Tonight, as you know, we're going to talk about art fair power. Here we are. And its effect on both communities, Chicago in this case, and also on the economy and the market of the art world. So I wanted to start out with a few statistics. I think they're rather astonishing. In 1970, there were 3 major art fairs. I know that the first peer show was begun here at 79 or 80. By 2005, we went from 3 to 68. 2011, there were 189 art fairs throughout the world. Now, I think we can all agree that's a phenomenon.
Too many.
And I guess what I want to ask each person on the panel is, what's happening here? How did this phenomenon start? Why is it ongoing? And most important, can it be sustained? So why don't I start on my right? Rhona?
Okay. I think some of the changes became with the internet, and also the fact that more people were interested in looking at art. But the downside for me is that people have stopped coming to galleries. They're beginning to be very dependent on coming to art fairs to look, where you can see, well, in our case, 120 galleries, or in some cases, 200 galleries. You can be as anonymous as you want to be, and you can get to see a lot of things. There's a danger, though, in forcing the galleries to participate in art fairs constantly. It means you're always asking the artists to make more art. Do you have make more art for me? I'm going to this fair, that fair. There are some galleries who do 11 fairs. I happily only do 3 or 4, but so I think it changes the artist production. I think a lot of galleries now are having exhibitions, so they have art to bring to art fairs. I know in Europe, years and years ago, I had a friend who said, well, I said, how can you sell art from San Gimignano? He said, I don't. I sell them at the art fair. Eric Fischl once told me that he was having a show in Athens, but he's only sending 1 painting. And I said, how come? He said, because the dealer only has 1 client. So,
but moving on,
right.
that sort of sets it out, Rhona. That's and brings up a lot of issues. But I wanted to give everybody a chance to talk about this phenomenon. Tony, what do you think?
We participate in 7 fairs a year, and the art business is a service business, and so these are a vehicle today that give you a chance to glean information firsthand. The JPEGs that exist on the internet are always informative, but are not the same thing. And this gives you a chance, as Rhona said, with a bit of anonymity, not necessarily having a discourse. If you want the discourse, you can, but it's a vehicle for information, and it helps form the things you like, but often, more importantly, the things you don't like. And it's a necessary evil that is not going to go away.
Interesting. Paul, what do you think?
I agree with you all except the evil part. So. Actually, I think
you live here.
Well, art fairs, for many collectors, are a wonderfully rich experience. You know, it's an opportunity to, if you're not from the city where the fair is held, to go someplace with a mission and to learn a great deal about a broad spectrum of the art world in a very short period of time. So I'd say they're efficient, and that's why they've proliferated.
Yeah, sure.
I just want to say that there are different galleries sell different art for different prices. So it costs a lot of money to travel with your art to the art fair. If you're selling very expensive things, you can sell a few things and break even. But if you are a young gallery, or even a gallery that sells mid-priced things, you have to sell a lot just to come and break even. So it limits the number of fairs that you're willing to gamble with.
We look at the sales, though, as an important side benefit. Frankly, we develop 3/4 of our new clientele by meeting them at art fairs.
Okay,
I mean,
thank you.
The single most important client that our gallery has ever engaged with in 50 years, we met in 1986 at Navy Pier.
Yeah, that's true, and I have that too, but the thing is, smaller galleries cannot keep losing money and still participate in the fair because it economically doesn't work out.
Well, Stephanie, I sort of asked you to be the distaff side of this forum purposely. And from your perspective, I know when we talked on the phone, you said you actually don't go to art fairs anymore. And as a curator, that's curious. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, so I maybe will bring the evil back and take out the necessary. With all due respect to all my colleagues on the panel and to the organizers of the fair, which is really, I mean, as fairs go, this is one of the most beautiful spaces, and you know, to actually, there is enough space to see work and to spend time with it. I've had some wonderful encounters with individual objects and some great conversations with colleagues who I wouldn't have otherwise seen. But I'm glad it's here because I have, over the last few years, I'm now going into my 3rd year of choosing not to go to art fairs. I've decided that that for me, for my curatorial work, I can spend that time and energy and institutional resource more effectively by going to shows like Documenta, by traveling to do studio visits, and to spend time in deep conversation with artists and colleagues whose work I can really learn from. So for me, the kinds of pleasures and conversations and experiences that I most value in the art world are not those that are best supported by the context of an art fair. That doesn't mean that I think art fairs should not exist, although I think there are real conversations for us to have about the number of them and the impact that they are having on all of our collective work. But I'm definitely the outlier also as the only curator up here, but so I know many of my colleagues do indeed find them very, very useful for all of the reasons that others have said, and also as a kind of conference situation where you can have really rich conversations, but for me, not where I'm choosing to spend my time and energy.
But Stephanie, actually 2 very wonderful pieces were acquired, one from the Art Institute and one to the Museum of Contemporary Art, because their trustees were on the floor looking at the art, and they were taken to the piece that the curator wished for, and they got their wish.
Yeah, and I mean, again, that's a wonderful aspect of the fair, and the circulation of objects through the marketplace, and the ways that flow of capital can go back to support additional creative production, can help make wonderful new art come into the world, can stimulate great conversations. The market is absolutely critical to many, many aspects of the art world. And it can result in wonderful things, you know, staying in our city. All of that is totally great. I'm just raising questions about some of the other aspects.
Right.
What you're
and
really saying here is that there are lots of reasons to have art fairs, and it's not the same reason for everyone who comes to an art fair. Linda, we talked about this earlier. We don't go to art fairs. I prefer to go to galleries because I can see work in depth. I can have conversations. I don't like the frenetic aspect of art fairs, but they work for so many other reasons, some of which we've heard here, and some of which are necessary, and some of which are evil, I am sure. By the way, I want to clarify something. I was not a founding member of the MCA board. I'm old, but I'm not that old, but I thought I'd raise that. You know, there's another reason that we have art fairs, and from my point of view, the chauvinistic reason for having an art fair, I'm a Chicago chauvinist. We have a great cultural community here. We had a great fair. We no longer had a great fair for a period of time. People said things about Chicago losing its fair which were negative. We think we have a great contemporary art community here. So we, and I'm a co-conspirator with Tony Carmen, we felt we needed to restore Chicago as a place that had a very major art fair. And a lot of us have put a lot of time, energy, and I hope some money into that. And so there's another reason that there are 180 some fairs. The cities get a lot out of it.
That's true.
I think that's absolutely true. I think the economics make sense for a city, but it is a question with 189 fairs going, how do you select the ones that you want to show in? How do you decide not to go? Are there different audiences? Are there local fairs and international fairs? Does Chicago want to attract an international audience? Or is it really focusing on the Chicago Midwest? Probably not, but there seems to be some limit to what people can do. I do not think any one of the dealers up here can do 189 fairs. I mean, that's out of the question. So how do you decide? Rhona, how do you decide?
How do I decide? Well, I figure I have a better chance of knowing more people in New York because I do, so I go to New York. Art Basel Miami replaced the fair in Chicago and was very, very strong, so that was good. I knew that there were going to be lots of people there who could buy. And then I do one other fair, sometimes in Madrid, sometimes in other countries. That's it, and I only do 3.
How about you, Paul?
Well, this is the 4th one, sorry.
We also do 3 or 4 fairs in a year, generally. And we generally only exhibited fairs that we believe will draw a large, broad, diverse international audience. So for instance, we don't do fairs in cities where it's clear that the audience is primarily local.
And can you cite a fair that you would consider local primarily?
Dallas, San
Houston,
Francisco, the Hamptons, Cologne.
Cologne. Now, Cologne was one of the 3 major fairs when...
I went to Cologne every year for years because it was major.
So, and that's another question. Is there an ebb and flow in popularity, in sustainability? Is Miami going to be the party always? Is that the fair that, because the weather is nice and it's winter, so why not?
Why not?
And if that's the case, if that is the case, then what is it about Chicago that you're promoting in terms of the city?
You know, Miami draws people from South America, which is something that other fairs don't do as much. Chicago, I think, was building upon creating an atmosphere for the greater Midwest, which means the middle of the country where there are really wonderful collectors who don't necessarily go to New York, who just don't go to Miami, don't go to Basel, but buy primarily within the Midwest.
Well, that's, Tony, you travel, it seems like you're always on a plane. And, whoops.
Nice drumming.
So how do you select what fairs you're going to be showing in?
Related to what Jack said and everybody else, there's an ambient activity, whether it's food, the institutions, an audience to some degree underserved, and there really is no fair within a 1,500 miles that does what Chicago did and is now doing, and so it provides an activity for people that can drive here. Obviously some fly, but it's an ambient, that the beautiful drawings show that it's the Art Institute, that has Rouchet drawings I've never seen before. What's up at the MCA, the Wren, et cetera, et cetera. And so the beauty of coming to a city like this and others is you're going to have the most eyes on things for the entire year. So the institutions have really put the hard work and the polish into presenting themselves in their best light. And it is a great opportunity to see everything from collectors' homes, et cetera. And the Chicago community has worked hard at that. Other cities like Miami have worked hard as well, et cetera. And so it goes in its different times of year. And these things run a cycle. And there was a cycle to Chicago, and it's back again.
Let me make a suggestion, though, that you don't have to have, there's no dichotomy here. You don't have to have either an international fair or a local fair. And I think we're striving here to be an important place in the Midwest while also being, again, an international venue. And I believe it can be done. I was amazed at the first 100 galleries, the 100 galleries that came here, the established galleries. About 33% are from abroad. And I don't consider New York or San Francisco abroad. So the reality is that I think that we're headed towards something that we used to be, which, and Rhona used to speak about it, that it was a Midwest Mecca. The fair became a Midwest Mecca, but we always attracted people from a very, very broad geography. I think we can do it again.
Right, but I spoke to some dealers from out of town who said they came because they used to sell to Midwest collectors, and they've lost touch with them since the art fair closed. So,
Well, I have another question that has to do with galleries and museums. People have said that the galleries are having a harder time. They see fewer people. It seems that people are more excited about going to art fairs. They're a wonderful destination, Chicago and among many others, and that the galleries themselves are suffering, and that people just aren't coming. And that would be very sad indeed. And I wondered if you had any comments on that. Tony, do you?
Yeah, I mean, the art viewing experience, whether you're purchasing, buying, or simply or selling or looking, is cumulative. So the point is, you come here, you see an artist you may like, not like, it's informative. And so the question back to you is it 2 years later when you're in Paul Gray's gallery, you see Rhona at an art fair and you buy something from her by that artist? And was it formed by the initial viewing in Chicago? Was it formed by the third? And so this whole thing is an experience which doesn't necessarily end. And you hope that you're always looking and learning, but how you attribute the success of that sale, is it to Chicago's first meeting with that dealer or the artist, or is it the third time? And you can't. And it really is about kind of honing your skills as a viewer or as a visitor, and being able to articulate what you do and very much what you don't like.
yeah, but artists create exhibitions that are a whole thing, something to be viewed, not just one picture on a wall at the art fair, but the whole art gallery filled with that body of work, and they wanted to communicate something with that work. Now, if you take it out of the gallery and you hang it in the art fair, you might be able to sell it, but you didn't see the exhibition.
Okay, but Tony Tassett's presentation is as close as it gets to a small gallery
Right.
presentation, and for those that don't know his work, it's extremely informative.
Right, but they're very nice, but it's very old work, and
Yeah.
it's not new work.
But I think, I'm sorry, just to jump in for a second, I think, a lot of it goes back to expectations management, right? In terms of understanding that the kind of encounters that we're going to have with work at any fair are going to be constrained by the particular viewing parameters of this kind of structure, and that's what it is. And so, there are ways to play with that. I mean, Corbett versus Dempsey has a really beautiful salon-style installation that they developed in collaboration with Christopher Wool, which is it's a super satisfying, experience to spend time with that work. But most of the kinds of encounters that we're going to have with art will be more in this kind of cumulative mode that you're describing, or a kind of a catalyst or a trigger, one hopes, for further conversation, for further research. If it stops with this, then we're not where we should be.
Right. Art fairs are not necessarily unhappy locations for one-artist shows either. We've done, I think, 9 one-artist shows in art fairs over the years, ranging from Calder to David Clayman to Jennifer Bartlett, lots.
But it's unusual, it's not the usual thing.
Well, at ADAA's art fair, we actually have about 1/3 of our booths are single artist exhibitions, and sometimes even more. So that's also true. But it is discouraging sometimes when I hear dealers say that the galleries are not as full as they used to be. And you do wonder, is there a type of collector or viewer who just goes to art fairs, and spends their time really only at art fairs? There seems to be, I know that in Miami, I encountered people who were basically shopping. They were not art fair aficionados, they were not engaged in the art fairs, but there were several lower end fairs that had reasonably priced works, and they were basically shopping for decorative reasons. And that's a very different kind of client and a very different kind of experience, I think, that most people on this panel would expect.
It may not be a different clientele, it may be a different forum. And so the point back to that is that there is a convenience factor to the art fairs, which makes the experience somewhat efficient, often overly or overwhelming, and that same person could come in the gallery and quote unquote buy something that is a decorative piece. Sure. So it exists. The beauty of the art fair is the quantity of information, and you basically leave when your eyes glaze over.
Which, how many people in the audience have had that experience where your eyes glaze over and there's eye fatigue of looking at work? But Stephanie, a question to you as an institutional representative, and Jack too, do you see art fairs as a place to cultivate some trustees and to serve your trustees by being available to them, by taking them around, by pointing out work, maybe even suggesting work that they buy with the hope of eventually coming back to the museum or the institution?
The SMART hasn't historically operated that way. We're a university art museum. We're part of the University of Chicago. It's a smaller institution, and we don't have the staff to do that kind of institutional kind of trip organization. And we've actually been building our contemporary program very steadily over the last decade. But a lot of the program that the SMART puts forward, a lot of the artists that we work with most closely, a lot of their work unfolds out in the public and isn't necessarily so easily accommodated in the kind of fair format. So it hasn't been as natural a fit as it would be for colleagues at the MCA or the Art Institute.
I would tell you that we're not so delicate at the MCA. We have a little bit different approach. It's very clear. I have to serve on the collections committee, and it's very clear what the curators are trying to do and how they go about it. No one's offended by it. We can't build a collection at the MCA. We don't have the budget to buy art, so we impose on our trustees and friends. And by the way, we get gifts from non-trustees. I'm always amazed how well we do from non-trustees. And we've had some, I'm told, some successes at this fair that some trustees have stepped up and purchased work that our curators are anxious to have in the collection. It also served, this morning there was a visit with the collection committee and our chief curator, and there's an educational aspect to that too, because there were pieces that were pointed out, not necessarily pieces that he was seeking to have in the collection, but he wanted to show the collections committee some of the artists that are coming into the MCA in the future, in future shows. That's another useful aspect of the fair in Chicago for us at the MCA.
And as a dealer, we've secured one exhibition based on an encounter with a curator, and it provides a nexus where people meet and these kinds of activities or actions take place.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the really, the kind of consistently satisfying aspects of spending time at fairs is the opportunity to, you know, pick up conversations, to push forward discussions that can lead to projects, that can lead to work coming back to the city and to our ongoing work here.
Well, I'm curious, since the 3 dealers and Jack on the board, what percentage of your sales do you actually do at art fairs?
For us, it's about 20%.
So that means 80% of your sales are in your gallery.
Well, 80% don't take place at art fairs, but it's not because people walk into the gallery necessarily. I mean, our business is sort of a hybrid.
Right.
We do about 1/3 of it is advising a relatively small coterie of high-end collectors who need to have eyes and ears and professionals to, you know, help make sure that they get what they want to get out of their collection. About 1/3 of it is through our artists that we represent and exhibit both at fairs and in the gallery, and 1/3 is composed of what we do at art fairs, as well as some secondary market business, general secondary market business.
I have to admit, I don't know what the percentages are. I know that since Miami Basel started, we've been doing a very large percentage of sales there, and also at the Armory. We still rely a lot on Chicago collectors to come in, and people from Milwaukee, people from New York. As I said before, there's an internet thing where we can JPEG photographs out, and people who know what they're looking for, if they're interested in this, we'll send them pictures that relate to that. So I would think that the art fairs are probably, like Paula, maybe 1/3, at least 1/3, maybe more.
Do you know what percentage of your business is with Chicago?
No. I guess I should know, but
That
I'm
small
busy.
percentage of our business done at art fairs belies the fact, though, that we do generate a very large number of new collector relationships
Yes.
through art fairs. Almost all of our new collector relationships come in some way connected to art fair.
But Paul, let me mention something about that. You mentioned something about that earlier. Somebody did, and the response was that, I think it was Rhona's response, that that's very hard for certain galleries. I really think it's sort of a have and have not situation. If you already have and you can be here, you can actually break even or maybe take a little bit of loss and have the new relationships established, which will turn into sales at a later date. Some of those folks in that exposure section, they struggle to get here, and if they don't make sales, they're not going to be able to come back.
Exactly.
And it's really a bit of a have and have not situation. And the gallery owners here who are sitting here, and bless you all, you can afford to prospect. Not everybody can do that.
But not every fair. I mean, there's a limit to how it.
Well,
have
of
to-
course not.
yeah.
And nobody, you know, Linda, you mentioned 189 fairs. Hopefully, every dealer is more discerning than to do more than X. And I don't know what X is, but I've heard some people do 8 or 10. That seems to me an outrageous number.
Yeah.
How do you
Well,
spend any time in the gallery?
We sell to people. It come to Chicago. There's a radiology conference here. There's this conference here. People come to Chicago to do all kinds of business. Most collectors, whether they're coming for business or not, always find a little bit of time to go to the galleries, and that becomes a pretty decent percentage of our sales.
Tony, what about you in terms of your business?
Well, I mean, the question goes back, is that you met the collector at the fair, but you made the sale at his home or at the gallery 2 years later, so who gets the credit? And I mean, I guess in round numbers, probably close to what Paul said.
Right. Is there,
Most of the major fairs subsidize to some degree the participation of younger galleries too, and I think that's a wonderful,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy to do that. I think it adds tremendously to our enjoyment of an art fair to have younger galleries that are doing serious, interesting, emerging programs around.
That's where I learned a lot about the younger artists.
Yeah.
and more there are sections devoted to single artists or emerging artists at fairs, some larger. I mean, I have a sort of interesting question, and I don't want the men to get nervous, but does size matter? That is to say, some of the fairs have been gigantic and so big that they are kind of overwhelming and exhausting for everybody, both the collectors and the dealers. And the other fair, and Tony Carmen and I were discussing this, and he said he very consciously wanted to not make it too big. And at ADAA, we are limited by the facility, and so we have only 72 booths. But, I mean, is bigger better, or is it just more exhausting, more confusing?
Depends on who's in the fair.
It's a quality thing.
Quality.
Always.
It's always quality.
So that it matters who comes to the fair, what galleries come, and what they bring.
Linda, people who are going to think about going to a certain art fair see the list of galleries that are published.
Right.
And if they see galleries that they either do business with or would like to do business with or find interesting, they will get on an airplane or drive their car to it. If they see a list of galleries at a fair that they have no interest in, they just don't go to that one.
The prior fair that was here, which failed, deservedly so, I had the opportunity to sit down with some of the organizers, and I said something to the effect that you can always get 180 galleries, but you're not going to get 180 galleries that you're proud of if you care about being proud, and it's not the 180 galleries that we want at a great fair in Chicago. So it is quality.
But I do think, you know, size does matter in terms of our capacity to absorb. You know, we've all talked about this already, but and there's certainly, you know, strategies that you can use, that you can bring to bear on that viewing experience. One of my colleagues, one of the other curators at the Smart, she and I used to go around Art Basel together in Miami. And we sort of made a game of it for a while of choosing a work in each booth that we went into that we would spend focused time with a piece, whether we loved it or we hated it, but just really dig into something and talk about it. So you can find ways to manage big, but there's a point where it's just impossible to take it in. And size also matters in terms of display. I mean, again, the way that the work is shown here makes it feel so much different, you know, and that's really critical. Context
does count, absolutely, and the general feeling of a fair is something that you know almost intuitively the minute you walk into it. You have a sense. I think that's true, and this one has done exceedingly well when it comes in all aspects of that. Well, before I throw it open to the audience for some questions, I want to ask each of you if you could change one thing about art fairs. If you could change it or the system, what would you do?
Pick somebody else first.
Okay.
I would make them shorter.
Better food.
Better food.
Go ahead.
I'm going to go in a slightly different direction, so I'll let you.
Okay.
Well, I would not do a panel at 6 o'clock when I could have collectors out trying to buy art.
Well, all right. So I wanted to throw one thing in, which was, which gets back to the question about the impact of the fair. All right. Sorry. Okay. So, but to get back to the impact of the fair on the city. All right. Sorry. I'm just going to wait till this Sound is done. Okay, so I was reading the Tribune piece on the fair last week. It came out as the fair was in process, and there was a moment in the text where the reporter talked about the fact that the fair, the prior fair had existed. It had been this great draw, and it had then gone into decline, and now there's this moment of potential renaissance, which is all true and great. I have no beef with it. But there was a moment when the writer said something along the lines of, and we hope to erase this decade of decline in Chicago's art world. And I think that was just a kind of sloppy sentence, but it was disturbing to have the vitality of an entire cultural community connected to the success of an economic enterprise, right? And we all want the fair to succeed, and it's great that the fair is providing this moment to bring us together, to bring a lot of people to the city, to create these moments for potentially rich ongoing conversations to continue and to begin. So the thing that I would change would be that kind of reception where if a fair doesn't work, the city is seen as deficient.
Well, you blame the reporter for that. I mean, neither of our papers have full-time art writers. So, you get whoever's on a general assignment doing it. I can't imagine that I don't know who the writer was, but I can't imagine he meant to slight the fair. It came out that way. But, I've had much worse written about me, so.
Well, to counter that, actually, Stephanie, in the New York Times, and I can't remember when it was, but they said Chicago seems to be the new hub for artists who are coming more and more to Chicago, and that might be the new place that so many people would be gathering. So I'd like, because it is 6 o'clock, I know you all want to see the art, but I'd like to have some questions. So why don't I throw it out to the audience for questions? Yes.
I was wondering, is it the art fairs that are cannibalizing? Is it the art fairs that are cannibalizing from the galleries, or is it just the Great Recession that we're coming out of affected both the gallery, head count that are coming in, as well as the fairs? Did you see the same effect in the fairs? I guess is sort of.
You mean the recession?
The recession, did it? What I'm hearing is the galleries are suffering because of the fairs. Was it just a matter of head count, patronage was down at both the fairs and the galleries because we're coming out of a Great Recession? Even I work at Northern Trust. Even my wealthiest clients felt a lot poorer at the lowest point of that recession. So buying must have been down, I'm assuming.
At the risk of being accused by Jack of being part of the 1% again, I don't think that there's a negative relationship between art fairs and a decline in patronage at galleries. I think the art market has expanded stratospherically over the last generation. As the demographics of society and the availability of wealth and time to enjoy it has grown, our business has grown a lot. I mean, there are far more successful galleries in existence today than there were a generation ago.
Yes.
The fact that people don't come to the galleries as often, that it's quiet on Saturdays when it used to be the busiest day of the week, I mean, that's a social thing, I think, more than anything else. People have moved on to new ways of enjoying and seeing and learning about art, including on the web, as you said, and at art fairs.
Also, to answer your question, I've seen more and more of people just like you in your profession who are coming to panels and coming to art fairs and asking questions and look at art and making a case for art as an asset class. And recently in New York, there was a whole panel about that, somewhat horrifyingly, frankly, because they were talking about highly speculative ideas of investing in the art market, but that's another story. But I agree with you. definitely, Paul. I mean, the audience has expanded totally, and it is so global and so international, and it goes from Russia to Asia to Latin America to India. I mean, it's just, there is almost no place that is untouched by art, the arts now. So in the last, I don't know, Paul, would you say this last generation? Would you say it's 40 years, 20 years? What would you?
Well, I've been in the business almost 30 years now, and certainly over that time period, the overall size of the art market has grown stratospherically.
I can tell you that when I started in the art world in Soho in New York, there were two collectors, well, three collectors. And this was the early 70s. One were the Vogels, Herb and Dorothy Vogels, you probably all know about them. Postman and his wife, who was a librarian, whose collection was basically built by artists because the artist practically gave them the work. And two other people, Panza Duomo and one other person. We would go into a loft and know instantly if a collector had been there, because suddenly there'd be a dishwasher or, you know, a washing machine. And, you know, it was so, we all knew each other. It was a small world. I don't want to I don't want to say that it was better. It was certainly different. It was a small community and we all knew each other. By the 80s, it had expanded. By the 90s, it was incredible. And so I would go to galleries and not know people. I used to know everybody in the gallery. So at an opening, I think it's been so dramatic. And I'm very curious, Jack or Stephanie or Tony, I mean, any of you, for what reason has this increased so much? Is
Maybe
it
the art
greater
fairs.
wealth?
I think greater wealth has something to do with it. I think people are willing to stretch their minds. I mean, contemporary art's always been tough, but I think increasingly, one of the things that we have found at the MCA, my wife and I, is that we go to the MCA events and there are a lot of people we don't know, and we say, hallelujah, this is great, right. Because it's as somebody just said, it's an expanding market. Maybe we're merchandising it better. By the way, it's tougher because the institutions are competing not just with each other, if you can use that word, but we know we're competing with the Nike store in reality, because people have so many diversions, so many opportunities, and they take advantage of them. But whoever just said it, it's grown mightily. Something has to do with the perception that there's something socially acceptable about art. Let's face it, that's part of it.
We haven't touched on
the fact that there is in our community a lot of happily some good young people who are willing to participate in every way, being buyers and donors to the MCA.
One thing hasn't really changed, though, that much over the last few hundred years anyway, and that is that artists are a special kind of element in culture. You know, they're some of the bravest, the most chance-taking, experimental, most generous, in fact, people in any culture. And the rest of us want to be close to them, for what we can learn from them and how it makes us feel to have the kind of realizations that they can provide for us.
We used to say in the early days, people wanted to rub up against artists. But one thing we didn't cover was the social aspect. Maybe it's just too broad a subject, but what about the social element of the art world? And also, has it overtaken some of the seriousness?
It's always been a social element. It's just that the word vernissage came from when artists were having their show and they were varnishing their paintings. They invited their friends over for a drink and to watch. I I think the dealers like, part of our job that we like very much is getting to know the artist, getting to understand more deeply what the artist is trying to say in their work. And collectors want that kind of communication with the artist too.
And access.
And access to the artist, because it really does enrich your understanding, not just your understanding, it enriches the way you look at something when you know more about it. So it becomes social in that way. So the dealers cater to the people who are interested in that kind of information, and that very often takes place over drinks, but, so.
Or at parties. The gentleman over there.
Linda, I guess this is probably to you or really to the group, but first a comment. You see a lot of the galleries, a lot of people are sitting there working on their Apple, or they're basically kind of focused inward, and they're not outwardly focused on the people coming through. I had one gallery I went to, this New York gallery, had a wonderful description about Jackson Pollock, and I learned some things, maybe a little bit too much about his drinking start, but nonetheless it did educate me a little bit more about Jackson Pollock. Another gallery I wandered into, which is a Philadelphia gallery, the gentleman came up and sort of challenged me, what do you think about this piece of art? And we went on to have a dialogue about it, because otherwise I wouldn't have looked at it at all. And so I felt that there seems to be, for a lot of people coming through, perhaps a lot of the patrons coming here, they're afraid to start a dialogue, perhaps, or the gallery owner may not be interested in having a dialogue. So I think there's a lack of education on the wall next to the artwork. What do you think about all that?
It's a big subject. I mean, I'm not a dealer, by the way, at all, never have been. I've been a curator and a commissioner for cultural affairs in New York. I have never been a dealer. So I'm in awe of their ability to be at this art fair or any art fair and see as many, many people as they do and talk to them about the art and the work. I think that may be one of the appealing parts of coming to an art fair, because I think in a funny way the dealer is more accessible. We all among us talk about the gallerinas, who are very forbidding in a gallery, are certainly not welcoming, and not every gallery. Of course, I'm making generalizations, and certainly in New York. Well, they often are. They are certainly not welcoming, and they don't go out of their way to talk with you. I think that's a complaint, frankly, that I hear at the ADAA representing the dealers fairly often. But I don't know how in the world at an art fair you can keep it up. I mean, how can you possibly talk to everybody? How do you know who a collector is? How do you, I mean, you have different clientele. I mean, how do you do it? I mean,
I think you have touched on the real seed here. Does a dealer need to know when someone walks in whether they're an art appreciator or a purchaser?
No.
Because that to me is a fundamental problem and a shortcoming. I personally had an experience yesterday where I had gone through the whole fair. I really honed in on my favorite pieces. I am a collector, and I went back to get some information about something that I was very interested in buying. And I got to hear about the gentleman's dinner reservations. And at that point, frankly, I was irritated, and I put out my hand and I said, hello, I'm so-and-so, and I've traveled here from such and such, and I'm interested in that piece. And that's a little bit disappointing to me. So I think the real question is, should a dealer even be asking that question? If somebody's in their booth, then I think,
I didn't, asking which question? I'm sorry, I lost you.
Oh, the question about should a dealer be prejudging whether an individual in their booth is a collector or, in just a looky-loo sort of position.
I don't think most dealers prejudge anybody. I mean, there are a lot of collectors already, so.
Right. Well, I'm from out of town, but it was very disappointing.
It's too bad that you had that experience. I mean, but it's interesting. It's something that that touches the work of those of us in institutions as well. This question of hospitality and how you help people who cross whatever threshold, whether that's of an institution or of a gallery, feel welcome without prejudging or assuming that you know what they need and what you might be able to offer them. So that kind of open possibility is one that I think, you know, everybody at this table would really, you know, value and take seriously, not only because it you know, it's ethically, you know, a good way to be in the world, but it's also really pragmatic because it sounds like that person lost a sale.
You know, can I just answer the question one more time? It's sometimes very difficult to know when to approach somebody and when not to, when you feel like you're stalking them and letting them be there just to look. So it really is incumbent upon the viewer to make some kind of gesture.
I agree with that 100%. I mean, it's an experience where you go in, whether it's a store or a gallery or some kind of transactional situation. But to be talked over is never a good situation.
I think you had a very unfortunate situation, but I think it's not typical.
Good. I'm glad to hear.
I don't think it's typical. Certainly not here. I haven't seen that at all. The gentleman over there wanted to.
As an out-of-town collector, I couldn't take more exception to that comment.
Wait, hold on.
Can't hear you.
I'm sorry for her experience, but as an out-of-town collector, I couldn't disagree more. There's a lot of people here that I've known for a long time who I go to come to art fairs and visit, and they're engaging. And Wednesday night, I walked into 2 galleries that I didn't know, that I had never been to before, that I had a wonderful conversation about the art. I can't think of anybody I spoke to this week that wasn't open, wanting to share information, whether they don't know whether I'm a buyer or not. They couldn't have been nicer. And I think Paul made a comment. You know, you do business today, and then you might do business 5 years from now because of a contact that you made today. I'd like to make one other comment to Chicago. I'm not a Chicagoan. We visited the GUTHMAN's house today as a group, out-of-town group that was put together. The collectors of Chicago could not be more generous with their time, their collections, and I think it's wonderful. I think it's a tribute to Tony. I think it's a tribute to all of you in the business. And you know, one of the reasons we're here is because of the collectors of Chicago. The art's wonderful, but it's nice to come to a city and be greeted by people that share similar interests.
I have to say, I applaud that, and I have to say the entire city feels that. Now, I admit I'm a New Yorker. We're not the most hospitable, but I really mean that everybody has been so exceptionally welcoming and nice and pleasant, and it's such a clean city. I couldn't believe it.
Let me just say that New Yorkers are getting better at this.
We're going to have to go to charm school, I think, but we're learning. We're definitely learning. There's another question over here.
Sorry, yeah. So I just wanted to respond to one of the last things you said before we started the questions section, where you said that you read that more artists are coming to Chicago, and just casual observance or whatever. I think it's because of the real estate, because it's like fairly cheap. Which, in turn allows for a lot of like self-initiated projects, like independent curating, independent art exhibition, artists as curators, etc. But my response or my observation of the art fair that is like in bringing international attention is that it inevitably changes the financial and demographic landscape of the neighborhoods that become our communities. This, as a New Yorker, I'm a New Yorker as well. This happened in, South Manhattan and is now in Brooklyn, et cetera. And so if art fairs aim locally, which, sounds like it's not like a great aim financially to get like big international collectors, but, perhaps it's a more sustainable practice to build a market and allow artists and curators to broaden their practice in a way that is good for art, but not necessarily directly building on the market. I don't know.
I'm not sure I understand.
I don't understand the
Is there a question there?
What's the
Okay.
question?
Well, the question is like aiming locally to build an art community before shooting for the international.
I guess I would say, you know, that art community exists. You know, like it's here. It's been here. It's really rich. And you know, for many of the things that the reasons that you're pointing to, real estate, and also a kind of, you know, Midwestern. You know, there's maybe a kind of Midwestern can-do spirit that you might want to point to for some of that. You might not, but there part of what's interesting about the situation in Chicago right now is that we have this incredibly varied and vibrant cultural ecosystem that includes, in such wonderful ways, so many independent practices, many different shades, from apartment galleries to, you know, temporary projects, to activist work, much of which can't be accommodated in this kind of context, you know, within the fair, but we can all coexist, you know, and can draw energy from these different points of activity and art.
And Chicago is very collaborative. I think my fellow Chicagoans here would agree. There's some element of competition, but there's also a remarkable element of working together toward a goal, making it a great cultural center, which I think it is. And the museums are really to be complimented on that, in my estimation.
And hospitality.
Yeah, absolutely.
A general atmosphere of hospitality, which brings me to the reception. You're all welcome to join us, please, and we'll continue the discussion over a glass of wine and some nibbles.
Thank you
so much. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, all of you, for doing this.